everyone, and welcome to our thesis defense on between mediation and litigation. My name is Ariel Feffer.
And my name is Peter Kelley.
And let's get started.
So first, we wanted to start out with why this topic is important to us and why we specifically looked at divorce. Starting out with, if you don't know, I'm from rural Arizona, and up until the 4th grade, I was homeschooled. So a little part of my education was all at home in a tight-knit family. When I went to public school, I started to notice that my friends were going through changes. And it wasn't until later that I realized these changes in personality related to their parents getting divorced. That sparked an interest. How does divorce impact children? And then I met Ariel.
I also grew up in an amazing, close-knit family as well. And then when I also started school, I started seeing that divorced parents were the norm, that I actually was the abnormality for having married parents. It wasn't until my junior year of college that I started interning at the Art Center for Divorce Mediation, where I learned just how severe an impact divorce has on kids. But I also had a severe passion for psychology and law. And at the Art Center, they were able to mesh the two into one. They were able to show law as a helpful tool for children going through divorce. That doesn't necessarily always have to be a harmful process.
So, starting out, we want to go over kind of just an abstract of our research. Starting out with our focus, we wanted to understand public perceptions of divorce mediation and court adjudication. We wanted to specifically look at how family mediation and litigation directly impact children during the divorce process. To do this, we had a mixed method approach. So we used quantitative research, survey research, and qualitative interviews and meshed them together. For our quantitative research, we had 159 student responses to our survey. And for our qualitative research, we did 4 interviews with legal experts. Going into it, something we want to kind of keep to your attention is our 3 key findings. Starting out with, mediation is perceived as more effective than litigation in reducing conflict between parents. Secondly, mediation fosters a collaboration, reduces emotional distress, and prioritizes children's well-being. Lastly, a very important one, is the general public does seemingly have a lack of understanding of the benefits of mediation over litigation.
As we go on, I want to draw your attention to the fact that over 1 million children a year experience parental divorce. Now, throughout our thesis, we're going to talk about 2 key terms, and this is litigation and mediation. I wanted to define them both for you. Litigation is a formal legal process that takes place in a courtroom where each spouse has their own attorney, and they don't usually speak to each other unless it's through the attorney. This takes place in a courtroom, and the ultimate decision is up to this judge. Versus mediation involves a neutral third party, which helps the parents employ effective communication skills to reach a mutual agreement. This involves direct dialogue between the parents instead of through their respective attorneys, and it occurs outside the courtroom. However, it is just as legally binding as if it were to take place inside the courtroom. The entire point of our research was to bridge this gap between what the public perceives mediation to be and expert insight on divorce mediation or divorce outcomes and its effect on children. A few other key terms are risk and protective factors. Now, these are psychology terms. A risk factor is any factor that can disrupt development in a child. An example of this in a divorce case would be interparental conflict, low parental involvement at home, economic hardships, and so on. Anything that would make it hard for a child to adapt to a certain situation. Protective factors, on the other hand, build resilience in a child. These are factors that can buffer a child from negative effects of a negative environment. Examples of this is like a warm, loving home, stable home, effective communication between the parents, and strong social support networks. Healthy development minimizes risk factors while increasing and maximizing protective factors.
So next, moving with our project, our thesis argues that high conflict divorces, especially those handled through litigation, increase the likelihood of emotional distress, but also increases legal outcomes for children. Family mediation, on the other hand, develops better divorce resolution, allowing the parents to work together, fostering collaboration, and having better outcomes for kids. So to do this, we had 2 research questions. Our first is very broad. How does public perception of divorce mediation and court adjudication compare to those of legal experts? We then narrowed it down for our second research question, which specifically looks at what role does mediation play in reducing adverse effects for children during the divorce process. So going into this, we're going to start with the quantitative research. This is survey research. And I'm going to quickly run you through how we went about it and the timeline of it all. Starting all the way back of July of last year, we applied for the School of Politics and Global Studies Experimental Lab Competition. This is the way that we wanted our survey to be dispersed out to students at ASU. We won the competition in late July, and from there, we then started working on our questions, but also receiving IRB approval. IRB is the Institutional Review Board process. They are the ones that overlook all survey research at ASU and basically make sure that it's ethical. We received approval for that in early November, and by late November, we were starting to send the survey out to students. So the window was open from November 25th to December 5th for students to take, and then it closed. We used Qualtrics survey platform, which is just a basic statistical and survey platform, which allows you to create questions, but also have a shareable link for students to take. Within our survey, we had three clear focuses that we wanted to highlight: divorce, mediation, and court adjudication. These three we really wanted to highlight as it allowed our focus to be narrow and also gain valuable insight about these areas. From there, we targeted students at a large Southwestern university, which it shouldn't be that difficult to realize what that large Southwestern university would be, but that's where we specifically did our research. So from there, our survey design was a mixed method approach. So we had qualitative questions, which were free response questions. One specifically that I'm going to highlight was asking students to give 5 words to describe divorce. And Ariel actually has a couple.
Those words were conflict, tension, sadness, instability, and fault.
And from there, we then compiled those together and sent them out. With that, we also had quantitative questions. Think of Likert scales. Strongly disagree to strongly agree. Do I like Pop-Tarts? Strongly agree. Super simple, super easy. With that, we then sent the survey out, and there was only one contingency section. What this means is if a student responded that their parents had been through a divorce, they were removed from the general population and brought to a separate set of questions specifically targeting them, asking them about their divorce experience. Once they answered those, they were brought right back in with the general population, and from there, everyone answered the same questions. To analyze the data, we use SPSS statistical software, running ANOVAs, t-tests, linear tests, the whole 9 yards, to basically look for correlations and significance in the research. For our free response questions, this we just use qualitative measures to look for insights and themes. So quickly, I want to go over some of the results relating to demographics. So of our student sample, 34.9% of students said that they had experienced parental divorce. This is actually lower than the national average that you would see for kids our age. 65.1% had not experienced divorce. This shows that our sample is slightly different than the national average, but that's not a bad thing. That's actually good. It shows how our research applies to the more general research and how Arizona is different. Next, we asked students who had been through divorce what resolution technique their parents went through. For that, 42.6% said that their parents used court adjudication, litigation. 29.5% said their parents went through some form of family mediation, and 27.9% said they went through some form of other. Our project specifically looks at court adjudication and family mediation, so that's why we left other open, because it really wasn't relevant to our research itself. Lastly, something I want to point out is the age at time of divorce. We see 55.7%, a majority of students, said divorce occurred before or at the age of 8 years old. This is lower than the national average yet again. We usually see 55% right around age 11 to 12, so it just shows our sample is yet again slightly different. With that, we had 6 key insights from our results with the quantitative research. I'm going to highlight 3 of them. Starting with the very top goal, mediation is significantly better at reducing conflict between parents during the divorce process. This is important because we can see that the students identified that mediation is better at reducing conflict. But it gets interesting when you look at number 3. Students were seemingly unaware of the benefits that mediation has over litigation. So they're saying that they see that it reduces conflict, but they're not connecting that reducing conflict to benefiting children. That's the issue that we are seeing with the perception versus reality. Lastly, there was no significant difference in perceptions of preferred divorce type and divorce experience. What that means is just going through divorce doesn't make you more likely to choose court adjudication or family mediation. Instead, it's based off lived experiences.
Now we're going to get into the qualitative research. The qualitative research includes interviews from 4 experts, stemming from a juvenile defender to child psychologist to a family law judge to a divorce mediator. Now we're going to start with the juvenile public defender. She explained to us that family dynamics have such a strong impact on juvenile delinquency. She explained to us that children who come from high conflict homes actually end up doing more severe crimes than kids who come from a lower conflict home. She also explained that kids who come from low conflict homes, who have parents who are engaged in effective communication, actually have better legal outcomes than children who don't. These children are offered alternative discipline methods or reduced sentencing than kids who come from high conflict homes. And then lastly, out of her 70 plus current clients, 87% of their parents were either divorced or never married. And next, we're going to move on to the psychologist. The psychologist explained that children of divorce in high conflict homes often leads to attachment issues and other mental illnesses that could stem from coming from high conflict homes, such as emotional instability or defiant behaviors. Now, she mentioned that high conflict homes, inconsistent parenting, these are all the risk factors we talked about that could increase the chance for a child to have anxiety, depression, or again, defiant behaviors. While children who come from emotionally regulated homes actually have more protective factors. They're decreased risk of having anxiety, depression, or anything else like that. Now, something she pointed out that I think is extremely important to remember is that conflict is not inherently bad. Fighting is normal. Disagreements are very normal. But she said, if you are going to fight in front of your child, you also must reconcile in front of your child. Also, there is a healthy way to go about disagreements. And these high conflict homes do not have that. These divorces do not have this healthy conversations that she was talking about. Another thing she explained is that divorces from high conflict homes use the children as emotional confidants. They switched the role of caregiver from parent to child, as these children now hold this emotional responsibility and loyalty to one parent as they hear about the negativity of the other parent. She expressed the immense benefit of mediation as a more child-centered approach. Parents are now removed from their own personal biases and focus on what is best for the family as a whole. And that in turn promotes healing. And finally, one more. We interviewed a family law judge. She had been on the bench for over a decade, witnessing a plethora of family law cases. Something she kept stressing over and over is the court rules in the best interest of the child. She kept saying this, and I asked her, is there a textbook definition of what's in the best interest of the child? How does someone know what the best interest of a child is? She explained that while judges have an extensive legal training, they have minimal psychological training on how to deal with the emotional nuances that come with a divorce. So oftentimes these judges rely on their life experiences, their personal lived experiences. Then she goes on to explain that these spouses who are on opposite ends are weaponizing the legal system as a form of retaliation against the other spouse. She shared one story with us about a husband who literally had to sell his house to pay for the legal fees. And when asked about it, he said he was happy with the decision because at least his wife didn't get the house. Then she acknowledged that attorneys are focused on winning. And this isn't a fault to attorneys. This is their job. They're supposed to side with their client. They want the best for their client. And this can derail the process and prolong the process. And oftentimes, children are pulled into hearings to testify on what's going on at home. Now, there's not really any guardrails against coaching or manipulating these children outside the courtroom to testify positively for one parent and not for the other. Lastly, she explained to us, as a judge in a family law court, that she would personally send these couples down to mediation with the pro bono mediators before she even heard their cases, so they would at least attempt mediation before going into the litigation route. And lastly, we interviewed an amazing divorce mediator. He explained to us that divorce mediation is widely misunderstood, that a lot of people think it's maybe just for cordial couples, or that it's interchangeable with family therapy. And he explained that divorce mediation is not about reconciliation. It's about resolution. Divorce mediation is more effective and just as legally binding as court adjudication. Second, he explained the key difference between mediation and litigation. Mediation prioritizes the family unit. So often in family law, the family part is removed, and it's now focused on two individuals fighting each other. In mediation, we have one mediator who represents both spouses and uses psychological strategies to get them to communicate effectively with each other. He explained to us that, again, the legal system does fuel conflict. There's a win-lose scenario. I win custody rights. I win these certain aspects or assets, etc. Versus in mediation, the conversation fuels a win-win model. What is best for everyone, and especially what is best for the children? In mediation, he explained that the children's needs are central. He is trained to guide parents into removing themselves and their personal biases and really focusing on what is best for the child at hand, what is best for the family. Now, these are the 5 big topics that all the experts agreed on. Mediation protects a child's well-being. Courts can be ill-prepared for these emotional nuances. That destructive conflict, not necessarily divorce, is what's harmful to children. Mediation promotes healthy communication and conflict reduction. And lastly, that a child's environment and what they grow up in affects them long-term, well into adulthood.
So moving along, we've had this qualitative research and this quantitative research, and it's time to look at how they overlap. Starting with what they both agree on. Both experts and survey respondents agreed with mediation is consistently more effective at reducing conflict during the divorce process between parents. Both the experts overwhelmingly agreed with that, and survey respondents also were agreeing with that. Doesn't mean they always agreed though, because when it comes to the statement, mediation offers a significantly better solution over litigation, experts did agree with this. In cases with children, mediation offers parents to come together, foster collaboration, and work together. The survey respondents, on the other hand, didn't have it that clear. If anything, sometimes they'd support mediation and then flip-flop by the end and say, no, court adjudication is better. There was no clear answer, and if anything, they slightly disagreed with it.
And then we were happy to see that both survey respondents and experts agreed and noticed that conflict and parental communication do impact a child's well-being. But to draw your attention to the last point, Peter, is it divorce that inherently causes harm to children?
No.
No, it's not divorce that causes harm to children. It's the intense, high conflict, ineffective communication that comes from divorce and court litigation that really can have a harmful effect on children. Now, to bring it all together, our initial expectation going into this thesis was that most people wouldn't understand the benefits of mediation. And what we found was that a majority of students did understand the differences between mediation and litigation, but they did not understand the significant benefits of what mediation actually does for children.
So from this, what can you take away? What's the major finding that we want? It's really that making sure to highlight the importance that family mediation needs to be the primary divorce resolution technique, not the alternative. Especially in cases with children, you need that mediation and collaboration. Our research specifically fills this gap between public perception and what the experts are seeing in the real world. Bridging it together, our project aims to continue conversations about how mediation can be used.
And we just wanted to thank you all for coming today, and specifically thank our chairs for being incredibly supportive throughout this whole process and all the edits and everything. And thank you so much. And then also to specifically thank Mikey. I had the privilege of interning with him, and really what I learned from him fueled this whole thesis defense, and he's been nothing but a support this whole time. So thank you all.
before we go into questions, I don't know if you guys know this, but Ariel was actually my first friend at ASU. And we thought we'd throw this in here. You can see all the way back in August of 2021, I met Ariel the second day of school. And as you can see, she stuck with me all the way to April of 2025. And if you look at our shirts, you can see we're both wearing ASU Law t-shirts because that's where we're going to be going to law school. So
Couldn't ask for a better future. All right, any questions?
yes.
So, question on that, but you might want to write down the next group.
Mhm.
As I was going through, I liked actually your figures here, you know.
Mhm.
But some of the relationships could be spurious.
Mhm.
On analysis, and if you feel like think about how you then well, this reports are just association, so you're not really looking at causation. How might you try to what you also might to explain how better to ask.
So actually, I'll start with that last one. So when it came to looking at our research focus, we knew that we wanted to do a survey, and that was kind of our first step. So we started doing the qualitative because it was kind of the way things shaped out, but we totally agree. If we could go back, we actually would have flip-flopped it a little bit, because it would have been able to like aid us in actually writing our research questions, but also our survey questions. It's kind of just how it ended up shaping out with the timing of everything. So that's the reason why the qualitative came before the quantitative, but that is something we did know as well. And your question about kind of like more regular divorces and kind of being a biased sample, totally agree. Family mediation is not always going to be the best option, but it really helps when you have this division of assets, and especially when you have kids, because this is where you're not just dealing with two parents divorcing, you have this third party who has really no say in it. This kid is there listening to their parents arguing, and that's the cases where family mediation really helps. There are circumstances where the parents go, we don't want to be together anymore. And you know what? We're just going to kind of separate. Maybe they still live in the same home. Maybe they just find a way of working it out together. but mediation as compared to litigation offers a smoother transition.
And then also to speak to the bias sample size, the,
Not biased.
oh, sorry, the
Bias.
interviews for the
No, not
qualitative.
even. So the people that you did interview, they see their view of mediation versus adjudication. It's just a subset, probably the worst, most conflictual. They didn't do either one because their parents were were civil to each other. They could work it out without having to go this next process. Even if you guys think that mediation is better than parents working it out themselves, that's not what these people see. So they're seeing the worst.
Oh, yeah, so that's why the child psychologist was really helpful in that, because she's just dealing with a lot of kids. And so that's what we were kind of gauging, is how are these kids who are actively going through divorce comparing against her regular subset of clients. So, but obviously, like when you're dealing with like a public defender or something like that, it's going to be slightly more biased.
But not every kid goes to the psychologist.
Yes, yes.
So,
yeah. We totally agree.
I'd also say the family law judge oversaw most litigation cases over a decade of time on family law court. Like she saw the worst to the best cases, and
but not everything is litigation. That's fine. Yes.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
I mean, my entire life, I only know one person, and that was but see, like I don't know. I mean, I don't know. 90% of the people I know don't. So I think it's I mean, you could.
Yeah.
But my point is that I think it is that your qualitative research, they're looking at.
Yeah. And then, oh yeah, specifically about the 28% that said other, that was actually something we caught after the fact. Is we also realized that some of the students might not have known, and they didn't really have the option to put don't know. So that was actually kind of just a mistake in the quantitative research, because we should have had a free response like section there. So it would have been court adjudication, family mediation, and then other open. It was other closed. So that was something on our part. If we like for future research, that's something you'd want to look at, because is it that these kids don't know what their parents chose, or is it that they went through some other formal process that they do? And then, oh, do you want to talk about like why the causal relationship, why kids might be thinking in different ways?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the risk and protective factors. I think more research on regards to like exactly the causal relationship between conflict at home and exactly what tendencies they would develop because of this. So I think that's something we could do. We could do a bit more research into like what exact risk factors do have a causal relationship with delinquent behaviors in the future.
How would you? So usually, it's kind of big. So you would still have for relational data, even if you have like more sophisticated models. To actually get at this might be more to get at causal relationships to
Yeah.
so get at
Yeah, so a way that you could kind of go about that is first surveying the population, seeing if they've been through divorce, what kind of divorce their parents went through, and then creating an experimental design. And it could be a hypothetical situation. You have James, he's 8 years old, and his parents are going through a healthy divorce where their parents aren't fighting. And then they answer questions relating to the impacts on that kid. And then another experimental design that would be Esther is 12 years old and her parents are going through a high conflict divorce, and asking the same subset of questions. So then you could take those two scenarios and look at how, based off of the student itself, like Are they divorced? What kind of divorce their parents went through? How do they react to those two different situations? And from there, you could kind of gather some insight into, is it the divorce type that their parents went through? Is it even just experiencing divorce that changes how they view the outcomes for those two different cases?
I think a lot of times when people look at family law, they are like, why do you want to deal with divorces? I can honestly say after interning with a divorce mediator, I want to work with divorces. Like, I think there's such a healthy way to go about it where you can actually use law as such a powerful tool for helping children. Like, and you can combine psychology and law in this way. And I think this research really shows that. And just the experiences we had working with a divorce mediator and speaking with these experts, it really shows us how divorce is not inherently harmful to children, and it doesn't have to be. And the negative effects we see from divorce don't have to be so rampant. And by putting mediation as the primary focus, we can really help a lot more children adopt these protective factors rather than risk factors.
Yeah, and I'd say
No, I keep gonna have follow up, but that you went the next. Yes. You wanted to follow up.
Yeah. So basically for me, I don't know if mediation is the way I want to go. I don't know if divorce is the way I want to go about my legal education and then my career. But I've always had a soft spot for kids. So specifically looking at children with divorces, that's something where you see a major shift in a lot of children. Divorce is this like something they remember for the rest of their lives. So especially in undergrad, I thought it would be cool to gain experience, look at this legal lens of divorce and seeing how it might apply to my future career.
I enjoy your presentation. I also enjoyed working with you. We worked very well together and it was wonderful to see. Your first research question asked, how does the public perception of divorce types compare to views of legal divorce experts? So I want to ask you, why is this important in the following way? Obviously, especially in our current age, we don't trust experts. It's part of all kinds of things. So you found that there is a gap. What do you think you can do about it? Why is it important to know that there is a gap, and how do you bridge this gap?
I can take this one. In addition to all of our expert interviews, we also have tons of background research aiding, pretty much supporting everything that the experts were saying. I think this goes back to our last slide about talking about how litigation is often seen as the primary and mediation falls under the alternative dispute resolution category, where it's seen as an alternative backup for a lot of people. I think this research gap shows that a lot of people don't understand how significantly better a child's outcome will be if they go the mediation route first. If they try that and before going to the court, like litigation side, I think it would have a really big impact on a lot of people if they started looking at it as the primary rather than the alternative.
Just one question. You speak about legal experts, but I think you talk about experts. Not all your interview were with legal experts.
Right. So 3 out of the 4 of ours had a JD, and then just the psychologists.
But the psychology was so important. And
right.
One of the points that you say is the judges have minimum training. So I'm not sure why you focus on legal, but you say them out. Second thing, which is really pedantic, you speak about the public all the time, but you interview students. Is there a gap between student and public? To what extent do students, especially given their age, represent public? And I don't know what public would be without some kind of definition to count or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because it's true. Our survey of students is technically general public in that we're dealing with random people. We don't know them. This isn't our friends. And it's a subset of the general population, because to do a survey that goes out to everyone, you need millions of dollars to facilitate that. So the reason we say public is because that's kind of the sample we're dealing with. But that's why we're quick to address this is a student sample, because it's a student sample of the population, and we just use population to address it thereafter.
Only that most of the time, I mark the pages, but I don't know where most of the time you say public.
Okay, yeah.
And the conclusion of it is about public. So I wonder if you just want to make a comment.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear. Would you, since you want to promote the mediation method, would you advocate legislation? I was impressed with what the family judge said, that she doesn't accept any divorce case unless they first saw mediation. And if everything you say is so clear, it's no, I know you talk a lot about perception, but it's quite clear that mediation, according to your analysis, is superior to litigation, not only in terms of the children, but in terms of the family, in terms of the adults involved. And given that this family judge says she will accept any case unless, if you were to continue this case, your next step, maybe the requirement.
So in terms of divorces nowadays, there's no like requirement that someone has to do litigation over mediation. It's just the societal norm or thoughts based off movies and stuff that, okay, this is what litigation, if you're getting a divorce, we have to go the litigation route. When I spoke with the family law judge, something I didn't mention was I asked her what changes would she like to see. And she said that one big thing, and maybe this is a place where legislation could come in, was that family law judges severely lack the resources to be able to adequately make life-altering decisions for these kids. She said, as a mother herself, she was able to think about things that most other judges don't think about. So in terms of legislation, I would say maybe requiring judges who are dealing with such emotionally nuanced cases to actually have the training to be able to deal with those cases. But legislation regarding mediation, I can't give like a definitive answer because I don't know what that legislation would look like. I do think a big part of it is changing the norm and changing what people think of mediation. And you can see there is a big gap between mediation and what people think about it. So I think our first step is to address that.
The generalizability to it. What didn't occur to me, and I should have thought about this and talked to you guys this earlier. It's one of the areas of law that is exclusively left to the state. Almost every other, there's federal system. Can you talk to California? So I'm just wondering, every state's different.
Yeah.
Right? So what you're talking about, but your sample may have been students from other states, because they have students. So have you thought about that in terms of the legal context?
Would you like to take this?
I can start and then you can jump off that. I did ask her about that. I did ask about the differences between California legislation and Arizona legislation regarding child like custody disputes. And she mentioned that there's a significant overlap between the two. Also, the mediator we spoke to practices here in Arizona, and he corroborated a lot of what the family law judge was saying. Also, when speaking with her, I did ask her to kind of keep it more anecdotal and speak about not necessarily because they live in California and to use California statutes, just to speak about the experience of being a judge, just in general, ruling over these cases.
Yeah, and continuing with that question, that's also what makes our sample kind of like more population focused is ASU brings in so many students from so many different areas that one kid's divorce is going to be different than another's because they're in a different state, they're under a different system. And specifically looking at future research, that's something that you could specifically target to try to understand how students at a school like this differ in their divorce experience based off the state that they came from.
I think that I don't know if Professor those graphs you put in your presentation.
Yeah.
so you have to do that.
Yeah, we'll get that.
Those are, we'd like to see.
Yes.
And then also it just occurred to me that we were surprised by the number of ASU students went through current course. It's smaller or lower than the national average. Did you ask them?
No, so that was something we didn't even consider in the first place until we actually talked to the public defender. And that's when we realized, oh, yet again, another area for future research that you can basically look at.
It's all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Oh.
There's no question. You said when you talk to child psychologists, at a certain point, you say, despite its potential and quality challenges, Martinez, this is the psychologist, emphasizes that mediation is something better. The point
Okay, so anytime a family goes through a change, it can be categorized as a risk factor. So anytime there's a significant change in what the household looks like, who they're spending time with now more than the other, like these are all categorized as risk factors. Mediation, not all mediators, but some mediators do bring the child into the room with them. And so just discussing one parent over the other can be stressful for a child. But she did say that going through the mediation process in comparison with the litigation process is ultimately way better for the child's psyche than litigation. But just the inherent fact of my parents are splitting up, I now have to divide everything between two households, and now I have to go talk to someone about it, is inherently stressful. She did say that with litigation, children actually harbor distrust for authority, as they're not, like, as I mentioned before, coached and manipulated. They actually have a hard time forming attachments and trust with people going through the litigation, versus in mediation, she didn't see that as much.
If I may, I'm not quite clear on what you said, because I thought my impression was from reading your interviews and the research is that unlike litigation, children actually are not present, are not required to be present in the mediation. That's one of the positives.
Yeah.
And I said that's great.
Not in all cases. In some cases, the parents can bring the child, but they're not required to be in mediation. A lot of the mediator we spoke to does not bring the child in.
Dylan?
Just curious.
There are some like divorce mediators and research that does support that. However, I do think mediators are capable of getting the parent to focus on the child's well-being enough that it's not necessary. Like, personally, I do think it's scary for a child to have to go talk to someone they don't know about something that's extremely personal to them. So there is some research that completely supports taking the child to mediation. Personally, I think minimizing this child's like stressors is probably best.
First, a great presentation, fascinating and well explained, and a lot. Seeing what you brought out of it for the child, the parents, for society as a whole, I think, I would encourage you to sort of across the board, especially children. See,
We got one.
As far as you guys' survey, it was all like ASU students. You think you would have had like a wildly different results if you've interviewed like about the same like age gap and everything, but just because all these students, like their parents must have done something right, they ended up in college. If you did, you know, people that went into trades or working in restaurants, military, stuff like that.
Yeah, honestly, that's yet again this difference between we have a subset of the population, and you're correct in saying that even though these parents got divorced, their children were still quote unquote successful enough to make it to college. How would this compare to the trades? And there would probably be a major difference. And yet again, back to this, there's so many kids that are affected by divorce, it's hard to wrap them up into one survey. And this is aiding in kind of seeing how does certain subsets of the population see divorce. But that's very true, because I personally believe that if you took a kid who didn't even graduate high school and their parents got divorced, their reactions to our survey would have been different than a college student, for example.
And I think that's an important part of where the experts like anecdotes come in. They are able to, like a juvenile public defender is able to speak about the worst cases. These are the kids who didn't end up going to college, who are literally behind bars at a very young age. And she was able to attribute a lot of that. Again, it's not a causation, but there was a strong correlation between the high conflict homes and the juvenile delinquency. I think that fills in at least a little bit of the gap.
Excellent talk. I just had a quick question about the statistic about it being contradictory and quantitative. So I know personally before this presentation, I didn't know a lot about mediation, especially because my parents works. So I'm kind of curious. It sounds like you didn't define mediation in this form before they took it. So did you ever like ask if they knew what mediation was when they were filling this out, or did you do anything to make sure that they knew, or did you potentially look and see people who actually went through a divorce if they aren't being contradictory because they now know what mediation looks like?
Yeah, so the way our survey was structured was it asked students just basically like, do you know what your parents went through, what kind of divorce? Then it actually had a prompt that defined court adjudication and family mediation with their benefits and their drawbacks. So before they went into the actual core part of the survey, they've seen what the definitions are, what the drawbacks are, what the benefits are. So we re-asked the question, do you know, like, which would you prefer and which would your parents go through? So we could kind of ensure that students were understanding of what the definitions and these different divorce processes were.
Kind of a silly question, but it's a huge topic. It opened the door to so many other thoughts, and the speeding up of the analysis and interesting. Polling in my life, and something here did statistics. You guys did statistics. One, do you trust statistics anymore? And two, do you rely now more on statistics or qualitative or quantitative data?
I would say we trust statistics because it's what we've got. You got to trust what these people like. I personally like to view it as you take this quantitative research, you're surveying the population. Yes, there's biases and everything, but you're looking at the population, trying to understand what they think. I personally believe that statistics are still valid and still hold merit in our society. But that's also a shift that we're seeing in our society today. And I think it'll change research as we kind of know it and how people go about survey research, because maybe they'll switch to more qualitative, but also in how people take that research and actually apply it into their real lives.
Qualitative or quantitative?
I trust both, especially when the qualitative experts' testimonies were all based on quantitative research in the past, not necessarily tied to our study, but just previous research we had done. Everything that they were saying was completely supported by statistics in other areas, done on much bigger research groups with much more money and a bigger sample size. So I would argue that I trust both, especially together.
And also, we do want to respect your time. So we're coming almost up on the hour mark. So does anyone have any last questions? I don't want to hold you guys too long. Thank you.
How was your experience?
There's so much I could say to this. I honestly want to say that this, like working on this thesis and really combining the two of my biggest interests has made me almost more excited to pursue law and go to law school and actually be able to make an impact. Also, I think from interviewing these experts, it's taught me how to be a kinder person in a relationship of any sort, that it's okay to recognize that conflict happens. You do not need to avoid conflict at all costs. What is important is to recognize how to deal with conflict healthily, because conflict can have such a harmful impact on a relationship and especially on children. So I think just like being more aware of that in like certain settings and certain relationships has really changed me, and then also for sure has fueled my passion for law.
I would say for me, growing up, I had family who worked specifically with juveniles and in the legal system. And I almost became desensitized to a lot of it because you'd hear about these kids going out and doing crazy things. And it's like, oh, okay, like they're just doing that. But this project honestly brought me back and looking at these kids less as a statistic, but also their experience. Did their parents get divorced? What happened in this child's life that led up to this later consequence, this later action? And I think for me, it's allowed me to kind of redefine what I want out of my legal education, which is specifically looking at helping people, but also understanding how their past influences where they get today.
Yes, I agree. And then we'll grab it. Pointed out at the beginning of your essay, mediation is not the only alternative to litigation. And we briefly talked about collaborative divorce, another method that is alternative for litigation. And I was wondering if we're going in this direction of the divorce, would it be important, or will it something that will be of your interest to compare mediation with collaborative divorce, and to actually see, to test mediation with relation to other alternatives? Something.
Yeah, sorry. Absolutely. I do think it's important to compare mediation to other ways of going through divorce, especially if we want to pass legislation. But just for the focus of our interview, we just focus on like litigation mediation, but for sure for future research, it'd be important to compare to others.
Yeah, there's a lot of future research to be done on this topic.
Anna? Okay, so one thing we wanted to do was interview children of divorce. We wanted to ask them exactly what happened and identify what key risk factors they shared. And then going through, we kind of decided we probably think that would be a little more harmful than helpful. However, that information would be helpful, but ultimately it wouldn't change our data very much. But if you want to talk about the survey side.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to get a sample of kids actively going through divorce, like people who are under the age of 18. But with IRB, that becomes a lot more complicated, and especially due to the fact that we had two separate parts to our research, wanting to make sure that we could get as much data as possible and have it be valid is kind of the path that we decided to take, as compared to continuing down the IRB route, which would have allowed us to survey younger children. It also would have made our sampling a little bit harder to find, because you have to find these kids who are actively going through divorce, and we didn't have the funding to do that.
And we'll invite you back when we're done.
Okay. We're gonna end the Zoom call. Bye, y'all.